Okay, I want to make sure that I recorded a whole preview of the final before I give it to you, just to be entirely fair, just make it kind of easy, just to make sure that everyone kind of learns everything that I've tried to include from beginning to end in the class. And um, so I will post this after I've finished it, and you can watch it, and you can technically watch it open um, with the final and use it um, to take the final, quite honestly. Um, so next week is finals week, and I hope to cover before that week in class, finish Autobiography Malcolm X's. Well, we should have finished it mostly. Get those assignments done. Get the essay, 3 to 4 page essay on Malcolm X. Hopefully, one draft shot. Just turn it in. Um, I know some of you are still working on a comparison contrast with Columbus, Thanksgiving, indigenous representation and colonization. Remember, this is like 100 extra credit points, and there's these are all extra credit too. If you want to do these essays on Malcolm X and issues related to Malcolm X, some of them I put some material in them, some I didn't. I did explain them in class on Monday in some depth for those who were there. There's the Yo Cut extra credit, 35 points for a 4-minute video. And then there is, because there's 5 more points for mentioning who the COS professor is. Who, anyway, a whole bunch of extra credit opportunities for right here, up to 300 points. Um, and I explain how to do that there. Um, the other Dr. Navarro's Indigenous History extra credit. He has a lot of videos. And then there's Harvest of Empire and the 13th, which I want to start these tomorrow, Wednesday, um, which would be the 6th. Okay, so the final. I just want to go over it. I'll try to go over it pretty briefly. It is open. I think it might be open now. Not sure. Let me see. It is open, I believe. I think one person in both classes has, started it. So, oh, I don't think do. I didn't give a start date, so, but I think I imported it relatively recently. Anyway, okay. So, does say unlimited, keep your highest score. The only thing is, there is an essay at the end. And so, with the essay, if you put it in, save it, write it somewhere else, and then put it in here, because otherwise, what will happen is, if you could lose it. You could lose it if something happens with your internet, if, um, I don't know, if it times out, or if you take the test again, right, the quiz again, then it will be deleted, right? All that whatever you wrote will be gone. So I don't want that to happen to you. Anyway, Henry David Thoreau broke the law to protest what U.S. action? He was in general against the pro-slave owning sentiments of President Polk and all those aligned with him who were pro-slave owning. They wanted to take more land from indigenous people and whoever they could take it from, and increase the number of slave states, thus increasing their own power and money. Um, Thoreau in America, I mean, people have always broke the law and done civil disobedience for noble causes all over the world throughout time. But Thoreau is an important American thinker, philosopher. Him and Emerson were kind of their emergence of distinct American thinkers, right, in our tradition, and they influenced people all over the world, including Gandhi and King as a consequence. Um, I like Thoreau a lot. Anyway, that's why I included him. That's why I had Zinn on Thoreau, because kind of there's these conversations over generations and generations of people. So, one was the war with Mexico, where we took half of the land that Mexico claimed and um, added a third to what is now the United States. So, Mexican-American War and the Fugitive Slave Act, right? That's the answer there. Number two, Thoreau refused to pay his poll tax for how many years in order to protest a government that counted slavery? And it was 6 years, all right? Who said the United States will conquer Mexico, but it will be as the man who swallows the arsenics, which in turn brings him down. Mexico will poison us. About the Civil War, historian James McPherson wrote, he was right, the poison was slavery. That's Ralph Waldo Emerson. Um, Emerson was a mix of good and bad. He was still like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant supremacist, and he was anti-slavery, but he's kind of disappointing in some of his things, like a lot of American white people. Thoreau is not disappointing. Thoreau was consistently dope, you know. Um, I mean, he didn't pick up a gun and a sword like John Brown did, but he celebrated John Brown, as did Emerson. But I would put him, Thoreau, in a kind of category of Americans who I really respect, like John Brown, and people that John Brown respected. So the law will never make men free. It is men who have got to make the law free. We have to be vigilant. We have to fight to make the law just all the time in all these different areas of our life. And that's the essence of the necessity of civil disobedience. Again, it's going to be Thoreau, right? So, this is a link to the. It should be a link. Oh, sorry. Um, Beyond Vietnam, Time to Break the Silence speech, April 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he's murdered. King calls the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today the United States, my own government, right? Um, so here, getting to the 13th, this is why I want to preview it, just in case somebody didn't get it in class, right? And I found a quote from Hillary Clinton, who I do not like at all, any more than Trump, because they're kind of the same. Um, so it's a stark fact, but this is true. You know, it's a stark fact that the United States has less than 5% of the world's population, yet we have almost 25% of the world's total prison population. The numbers today are much higher than they were 30 or 40 years ago, despite the fact that crime is at historic lows. So, this is, she's saying that, Obama was saying that, yet, and it's just true, right? They did nothing. I mean, her husband made a lot of the policies that made that a real thing, and Obama did nothing to really. He didn't do anything really to reverse it. Not much, at least. Anyway, he was the first, president to visit a prison. But here's a kind of statistical map. So, 5% of the people. Oh, sorry. We have 25%. 5% of 25. The question was what percent of the world's total population? I mean, sorry, prison population. 25%. We got like 1/4 of all its people behind bars. So, amendment to the U.S. Constitution abolishing slavery except as a punishment for a crime. Here it is. It is the 13th, which Ava DuVernay's, her documentary is named after that. According to the 13th, the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for black men is 1 in 3, right? And here's some links, and then these are different statistics about black men and how they're more likely to be convicted of crimes than innocent white people. Um, okay. There's a thing called the Southern Strategy, and it's mentioned in the 13th. And this is where you get a shift from the a lot of the Democrats in the South, right? I mean, the Republicans were at one time the party of Lincoln. They weren't all abolitionists, but around the Civil War, they mostly became abolitionists. And after, they kind of upheld that spirit for about 12 years. And then there was an election, and Rutherford B. Hayes basically, there was an election, and the Democrats said, look, you all pull out of the South with your federal troops enforcing all these laws for black people, protecting them, and we'll give you the presidency. It was tied, right? And they did. They pulled out, and the Republicans became kind of the corporate party in the 1800s, and the Democrats but the Democrats were the Southern white party to a large extent, and they called them Dixiecrats. It wasn't entirely, but there were a lot of them. And so in the '60s, Nixon's a Republican from Whittier, California, and he says, "Look, man, um, early late '60s, early '70s, he says should get them all on our side, man. We should just have them join the Republican Party, which had been changing. Nixon was a part of that, and then there were other Republicans who were too, and you end up with Reagan and all these other people come after. So this is called the Southern Strategy. So you change these Democrats to Republicans, and they're using code words for racism, what they call dog whistle politics, law and order, instead of saying black people, instead of saying the N word, which they used to just say. The methods the Republican Party used to gain political support in the South after the Civil Rights movement by appealing to racist ideology held by many Southern white voters against blacks. And it's worked pretty well. Right? So you get all these red states now that were formerly blue, in nominally blue. It's whatever. The two corporate parties, one corporate party with two branches, as I think how a lot of us see it. Okay, so these are Jim Crow laws. Now, again, the Jim Crow thing comes from, we saw in the 1619 Project. It comes from, the minstrel shows. And so this is segregation. The state and local laws that upheld racial segregation, separate equal legal second-class statuses for blacks. Laws continued until 1965 when they were outlawed, formally, right? Jim Crow laws. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old black teen who was murdered in 1955 for flirting with a white woman, right? Which he didn't do. She lied about it, like on her deathbed, anyway. And they got, the murderers got away with it. That's Emmett Till. Okay, this is Woodrow Wilson's favorite movie, the guy who resegregated the federal government, racist bastard. And even like his idea of, people will talk about how he had an idea of self-determination, right, around World War I and after. He meant for white people. all the colonized people were like, "Oh yeah, we want self-determination," and he really didn't mean it for them, right? But cat was out of the bag kind of thing. So D.W. Griffith's 1915 film, credited with the second era of the KKK, based upon Thomas Dixon's novel *The Klansman*, that celebrated the KKK and popularized the Lost Cause mythology of the Confederacy, which you see in all these different types, like Outlaw Josie Wales, all these famous cowboy movies and westerns. The heroes are Confederates, and the Confederates were devilish evil. I mean, in their constitution was slavery. That's what they want to. It's like when they talk about uh, Texas. I mean, Texas slavery was very important to the people who broke off Texas from Mexico, because Mexico was anti-slavery since 1828, since the Mexican Revolution. Portrayed black men as unintelligent and sexually dangerous. First film shown in the White House to Woodrow Wilson, who loved the movie. Remember, he said it was like history written with lightning, like God had written this himself. 1/5 of the white population in the U.S. is estimated to have watched the movie, and it remains one of the highest grossing films of all time. And these are, the Klansmen, the KKK were, this is 100 years ago, 108 years ago when it came out. And it was, 108 years ago in Hollywood. Literally, you can look in LA to, New York, to the White House. They had these posters. I don't know about the posters of the White House, but I mean, it was shown in the White House, first movie ever shown. This is some American stuff right here. This is absolutely American. And it's pretty disgusting and absurd. But that's the reality of American history. And anybody who doesn't want to deal with that just gives you a cleaned up idea about Woodrow Wilson is a base liar, right? Birth of a Nation. All right. Lifeline. This is a really important kind of diagram, right? Lifeline, lifetime. The likelihood of imprisonment for white men is 1 in 17, right? All men 1 in 9, black men 1 in 3, Latino men 1 in 6, right? And yeah, so 1 in 3 for black men, 1 in 6 for Latinos, 1 in 17 for white men. Okay, the term uh, it's called um, Third World, which used to be a reggae group that I really liked. I saw in concert when I was like 19. Was coined in the 1950s as part of an anti-colonial analysis that explained the poverty of many of the world's regions as a legacy of their colonial past. Underdevelopment is another word they use. Underdeveloped nations, not a starting state, but a result of colonial exploitation. Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa critiques the term development and the theory behind it, and shows how, you know, um, European states rose to power by exploiting um, their colonies, And there is a thing called neocolonialism where it basically does the same thing without necessarily having soldiers, until you need to, like the Gulf Wars or whatever. um, okay, so there was during the 1960s, in the context of anti-colonial revolutions abroad, and African Americans and Native Americans organizing at home, uh, a a Latino, or as Chicano, sorry, a Chicano and a Puerto Rican and Boricua movement also emerged in the United States. These movements identified with indigenous peoples of their homelands. They used the concept of internal colonization and analyzed their historical situation in the U.S. as that of colonized minorities rather than as immigrants. So Chicano, and this is, the Chicano moratorium against the Vietnam War. Um, the two big marches. Luis Rodriguez writes about this in his book Always Running. He was at the second one when he was 16, and he was actually arrested, even though he was just a homie. He was with his cholo homies, and they were just kind of getting drunk. And he got arrested for some stuff he didn't do, and put in the LA County Jail as an adult on death row because they had arrested so many people. Um, but the protest was because, I mean, I grew up with my brother, my father, who was a Vietnam vet and a combat medic, telling me that the brothers were the first to get it, and he's from Detroit, so like, yeah, he had black friends, and he saw that black folk were getting killed at a higher number than anybody else. But that was also true for Chicanos. That was also true for Latinos. Um, Chicanos made up 6% of the population in the 60s, and African Americans made up 12. Within that 18% of the population, they constituted 48% of the casualties in the early years of the Vietnam War. First 5-6 years of the big escalation, because we were involved in Vietnam since the 50s. And so you have, blacks and Latinos disproportionately dying, disproportionately being sacrificed, right? Largely with other poor people, including poor white people and Native Americans. Um, and Chicanos came out and they said, this is enough. And it was a really important thing, a lot of the Chicano movement. Um, they murdered, well, a lot of activists feel that one of the greatest Chicano journalists of the time, Ruben Salazar, who was bilingual, worked for TV stations as well as print media. One of the groundbreaking journalists was killed by the LAPD because of stuff he was doing then, which I wouldn't put behind them. Okay, question 16. The U.S. border with Mexico extends for nearly 2,000 miles. It is the longest meeting point between a rich and a poor country in the world. Right. This is an artwork that shows it shows 3,000 toe tags, right, showing how people die trying to cross the border, primarily in Arizona there. So between 1998 and 2020, the U.S. Border Patrol has recorded over 7,000 deaths of those attempting to cross the border. Um, Again, that's like lowballing the estimate. There are probably thousands more that they haven't found their bodies. That anyway. Harvest of Empire. there are a lot of people from immigrants from Guatemala here. Um, in 1954, the U.S. overthrew um, the democratically elected government of Guatemala. He was trying to give land, take it away from international corporations, U.S. based international corporations like United Fruit, which now is Chiquita Banana, and give them to the Indians, the indigenous people, and the poor people. And basically, this caused the 36-year civil war. It left 200,000 people dead, primarily um, indigenous Mayan people. You know, um, great painting. Anyway, great painting of Diego Rivera, the great Mexican artist, mural. Um, some books. Rigoberta Menchú, who won the Nobel Prize. Yeah, 1954, the CIA. Yeah, and she breaks a lot of stuff down. She's pretty dope. You Harvest of Empire then focuses. A chapter on Mexico begins with current images of the border, then focuses on the history of Mexico-U.S. relations, beginning with Manifest Destiny and the U.S.-Mexico War. It notes the large immigration into the U.S. during the 1910 Mexican Revolution and how during the Great Depression, President Hoover deported 1 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans from the U.S. And then later they invited some of them back uh, in the Bracero program. In the Deportee, the Woody Guthrie song of the plane crash near Coalinga that killed, I think, 24 deported Mexican workers. They were part of that Bracero program. But they call this Mexican repatriation, right? Which is a weird, but that's what they call it. It's something you can refer to when you refer in the histories to. Do you know that 1 million Mexicans, 60% they estimate were Mexican American. They were U.S. citizens, were deported in the 1960s. And there's a powerful representation of that in the movie Mi Familia has both like J Lo and Salma Hayek in it, and um, generations of Mexican Americans from LA. I just want to include this because I think when we're talking about we want to talk about Black civil rights and Malcolm X and Henry David Thoreau and talk about real history, and it affects how it affected people here and how the fact we don't mention certain things in history like this, it shows who we value or don't value. And I want to value more people that I grew up with, that I know, that are part of my community, that I love. And I think a lot of people feel the same. So Tommy Smith, he's born in Texas. He lived in Lemoore, Central Valley history. He stood up against racism at a time where things were crazy violent, right? U.S. was killing poor brown and black people here at home for marching for their rights, and all around the world, right? Basically the same thing. Uh, and they were sponsoring. They liked that government in Mexico that was killing their students, man. So some of the many factors being Central American migration, including long-term impacts of wars and U.S. military involvement in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras during the 80s. The neoliberal violence to follow the peace agreements in the first two countries, and especially 2009. It's again U.S./CIA supported coup in Honduras. That recently, Hillary Clinton supported it. She was a Secretary of State then. The millions of undocumented parents from these countries, because Obama got elected in 2008, right? And she was his Secretary of State. The millions of undocumented parents from these countries, yeah, U.S. It's all U.S. Whose parents are desperate to reunite with them. Horrific levels of gang violence homicide, drug-related crime, drought, food insecurity in those three countries, all that stuff. And this is just like a little map. Some of the U.S. 50. This is 56 U.S. interventions in Latin America, all over the place, all the time. You know, these are not even counting. Well, count some CIA stuff, but not a lot of it. You know, because it's all the time. All right. So you're not going to read this book, but I'm putting it in and I'm previewing it here. Because I think it's important for understanding California history and kind of like when I say that there were almost 300 sundown towns in the Central Valley. I think it's important to know. I mean, we're looking at Malcolm X. Okay, it's in Omaha, and then he's in Michigan. He's in the North. He's not even talking about racists in the South, really. And in the same way, he wasn't in California, but California had a lot of it too. And it wasn't just against black people. Because 10% of the population of California was at one time Chinese in the 1800s. And white people wanted them for building the trains, working in the mines, to do the dangerous jobs in the mines and building the trains. And then they wanted them to go. And so um, citizenship was particularly denied to Asians by 1882. They were prevented from coming into the U.S. at all without paying a lot of money or certain exceptions, etc., etc. And Chinese people were not permitted to naturalize until the middle of World War II, 1943. So 1882, the Chinese Exclusionary Act. Hopefully, these images will help you to remember, this and pass it on, man. Uh, Many states have established laws against brown-skinned, undocumented migrants, right? Including 2010 when outlawed Arizona teachings on ethnic studies, history, and culture in response to a high school Mexican American studies program. Today, Salvadorans and other Central Americans, as well as Haitians, once permitted to remain in the U.S., have lost their temporary protected status. With a swipe of a pen, they become migrants again. This is from Luis Rodriguez's essay. And these are kind of like some images. There's a link. You can go on the links. They're live and read about it. But, oh, sorry. So then they become undocumented again. And these are books that were forbidden in Arizona. Notice it's Thoreau. Um, um, Bach, Bless Me Ultimately, Mexican American. Housen, She's Mexican American. Williams Baldwin, Fire Next Time. This is about, if you remember Luis Rodriguez, he says that Mexicans and their progeny he's talking about in the aftermath of the loss of Mexican territory in the Mexican American War, that Mexicans and their progeny were more frequently lynched than any other group except African Americans. That's a lynching in Santa Cruz, California. Here are some others. These are just different. Like if you want to study in it, there's a whole bunch of different those links. You can open them. I don't know, right click and then open a new tab or something, right? So, um, if you're interested in this, oh yeah, see, I have this book, "The Injustice Never Leaves You," where she talks about like in East Texas, 5,000 from 1950, 5,000 Mexicans, Mexican Americans being killed, mostly by Texas Rangers and vigilante justice in in East Texas. It's insane. It's so horrible, and it's not talked about. I mean, they're trying to get those stories told because the people remember when that happened. And, they made museum works and stuff like that, but they didn't anyway. Um, Mexicans and Mexican Americans were also the most subject to segregation after blacks, especially in the Southwest, right? They won court cases to help end school segregation, like the 1947 Mendez versus Westminster. In the 1930s, again, during the Great Depression, around a million Mexicans were repatriated to Mexico, although 60% were reportedly U.S. Citizens. After U.S. blacks police have killed disproportionately more Mexicans and their descendants, as well as Puerto Ricans, Central Americans, and Dominicans than any other demographic, except for Indians. Native people are higher than black folk, unfortunately. So that is Mendez. That is the girl who helped to win the case, Mendez versus Westminster. It was argued by, Sylvia Mendez. Sorry, I forgot her first name. And that is Thurgood Marshall, who argued. He said it was. If you read this, Thurgood Marshall represented and won the landmark Mendez versus Westminster's case, which laid the groundwork for his victory in the Brown versus Board of Education case just 8 years later. And he later became a Supreme Court justice, the first black Supreme Court justice. So Mexicans, a million. King and Malcolm were both murdered before they hit 40, man. Which made me think, when I turned 40, like, what have I done with my life compared to those two great men? It's a real thing. Malcolm, as if you read in the Evolution of Malcolm X, it lays it out very clearly, and I have books just on that. You know, the last year of Malcolm X, great book. The Evolution of a Revolutionary, and it's just about how much he changed in that last year, and how because he had freedom to say what he believed, and not just toe the Nation of Islam line. And so, he was very anti-capitalist. He knew that capitalism was unjust, and so, he was anti-capitalist. See, anti-capitalist analysis of economic at home and globally. And this, pissed off the CIA and the U.S. government and a lot of other rich white colonial nations, man. And that's him with Fidel Castro, right? Fidel Castro he was in power like longer than 9 U.S. presidents, and they all were trying to kill him too. I think they all were. I mean, even if they weren't, the CIA was, and quite a few presidents did want him dead. Kennedy hated him. So, you can't have capitalism without racism, is something that Malcolm said, and it goes back to John Henrik Clarke and the founding of European capitalism on, as I talked about in class Monday, on the dispossession and taking of indigenous American land and resources, gold, silver, everything, and the enslavement of tens of millions of Africans and the underdevelopment of Africa. Nightmare, the first chapter of the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Both of his parents worked for Marcus Garvey, famous Jamaican black nationalist. Malcolm was born in Omaha, Nebraska. This is a march of KKK in 1925 in Nebraska. This one is for Lincoln, Nebraska, their advertisement for the KKK. Yep, kind of like, Proud Boys or whatever. Now, Malcolm's mama was born in Grenada. If you get that one wrong, you got to check your reading skills. According to the autobiography, his Malcolm's father is killed in 1931 in Lansing, Michigan. He's murdered by white supremacists. Malcolm does not see it as a tragic accident. He thinks that's BS. He was murdered. Malcolm's mom has, after murder of her husband, the impact of the Great Depression. There was a male companion who was courting her. She, and then and the state welfare agencies and everything else. Her having 8 kids alone, trying to support herself, etc., etc. Well, Malcolm gets sent to live with the Gohanas, and then she has a complete mental breakdown, right? And she's in a mental institution in Kalamazoo until 1963, when Malcolm and I believe his sister get around. So, this is 35. His, no realistic goal for an N-word is what his teacher tells him. I've had students who are, in their essays as teenagers, they wrote how this is like 10, 15 years ago. I can remember their names, who said it, I won't say, but beautiful kids, smart kids, Um, who said that, when they were in elementary school, that their teacher said that they would be worthless and they were stupid and things like that because they were just second language learners, man, because they were Mexican. I mean, it's not just black people who get this kind of treatment. And there's some people who shouldn't shouldn't educate people. They shouldn't be around. I know it's really it makes. I'm trying not to cuss in this video, so I'm gonna try not to do that. But it's really hard with this. All right, so he moves to Boston, live with his sister. He gets involved with the homeboy street life. There's his homie Malcolm Shorty Jarvis, right? And they are homies, man. They do all kinds of crime. They do all kinds of stuff together. It's his road dog, man. They get locked up together. They're in the same places for a while, etc., etc. Question 38 has to do with his zoot suit, right? Zoot suit, very important thing in Chicano history as well, man. Um, it's one of the ways in which Chicano, like looking at Luis Rodriguez and the ways in which he says that Chicano history influenced, kind of black culture and black history. Another way is late 60s, early 70s. A lot of the Chicano gangster, the Cholo culture, really does influence black gangster culture. And back and forth, black culture influences Chicano culture in lots of ways. The conch is a hairstyle that imitates white hairstyles. Laura, unfortunately, you know, happens to Laura after Malcolm leaves with Sophia. She ends up uh, strung out on drugs and becoming a prostitute, which, it's horrible. Malcolm's thug life proper really takes off when he goes to Harlem, and that's he gets into the whole Harlemite life. Um, he does con, which is a beautiful part in the book. He cons the psychiatrist, right, by telling him he wants to go down, like when he's alone with him, right? He wants to go down south and kill some crackers. So he's doing it to get a 4F card in the mail. He's doing it to avoid the draft for World War II. Okay, so for those of you who saw the movie, hope you saw the movie. Do the extra credit, get 100 points. Not hard to do. It's a great movie, man. But they just have him getting arrested at home. They turn off the water before they arrest him. Like they do if it's a drug raid or something. But that's not how it went down. He took a stolen watch to an expensive stolen watch to a repair shop. The jeweler, um, you know, told the owner, told the cops. The cops were waiting for him, and they arrested him. And they could have shot him, but he was honest with the cops, so they didn't shoot him and then beat him after. Malcolm was only 21 when he went to prison, right? So in 1946, a year after the end of World War II, Malcolm is sentenced to 8 to 10 years for armed robbery. He serves 6.5 years at Charleston's Massachusetts State Prison and the Norfolk Prison Colony. He was only 21. Um, he says, though, that the real thing was that he had a relationship with white women. That's why they really cracked down on him. In 1948 or 49, following many of his siblings' conversions, right? Not Baines. There's no real Baines in the book. Malcolm converts to the Nation of Islam while in the pen. Um, so he's 2 or 3 years into being in the pen, right? In 53, Malcolm changes his name he's given his ex, right? It's actually kind of like, he doesn't just change his name, like it's bestowed upon him, right? From Elijah Muhammad. And it symbolizes the variable unknown, right? The names of Africans and their descendants taken into slavery, robbed of their culture, language, religion, and original name. Little, like Clay for Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali, was a slave name, right? And I put memes that really do connect to him, right? In the late 50s, after becoming the national spokesman for the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X travels to the Middle East and to Africa and starts to really see the African American struggle in a larger global context, instead of a global struggle against the white power structures, So there's an anti-colonial struggle, and that the colonial struggle is what has permeated, you know, being of colonized people, and what has to be fought against. Everything has to be seen as that. Yeah. And this is it kind of puts it in the white man knows what a revolution is. He knows that the black revolution is worldwide in scope and in nature. The black revolution is sweeping Asia, sweeping Africa, is rearing its head in Latin America. The Cuban revolution, that's a revolution. They overturned the system. Revolution is in Asia. Revolution is in Africa. And the white man is screaming because he sees revolution in Latin America. How do you think he'll react to you when you learn what a real revolution is? Now, these are real strong, quotes and words, and um, you know, um, and the U.S. fought very, when I showed you the 56 military interventions and stuff like that in Latin America, that's how the U.S. reacted, right? And but it's really interesting because you get these waves of repression, and then you get these waves of, you know, you can see it now, whether it's Bolivia, Colombia, or other countries. So they're showing solidarity with Palestine over Israel, where they're showing, solidarity with the quote unquote global South rather than the colonizers in the global North, because of the consequence, because they know what's been done to their peoples and their countries, and they reject it if they're not sellouts and part of the system. Okay. In 1963, the United States of Islam orders Malcolm X to be silent, allegedly because of remarks concerning President Kennedy's assassination. Uh, uh, it was, meaning the assassination of Kennedy, uh, as I saw it, a case of the chickens coming home to roost. I said that the hate in the white man had not stopped the killing of defenseless black people, but that hate allowed to spread unchecked had finally struck down this nation's chief magistrate. Also, they've been killing people all over the world, like, including world leaders like Patrice Lumumba in 1961, first democratically elected president or prime minister of the Congo. April of 1964, so March of 1964, Malcolm breaks with the Nation of Islam publicly. I mean, he had long ago broken with it. Declares he's a Sunni Muslim, and he goes to make the Hajj, the pilgrimage. And he does change his name to Al Hajj, meaning the Haji, meaning the one who's gone on a pilgrimage. Al Malik is Shabazz. Malik means king, and Shabazz, um, it's still kind of a connection to the Nation of Islam in that they felt that black people were this lost tribe of Shabazz. Anyway, it's the Hajj is the answer. And talking about the Hajj, he says there were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe could never exist between the white and the non-white. This Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which are the Shahadatain, the bearing witness that there is no God but Allah, and knowing what that means in Islam. No God but God. God is one, has no partners, is not in creation, but controls creation, knows all things, all these other kind of things. And then there's no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God, the last and final messengers of God to teach mankind. And he was born in 570 or so and died in 632. That's Islam. What 1/5 of the world, between 1/5 and 1/4 of the world's population believes in. Nation of Islam, very small cult. It had 600 members, 300 to 600 members when Malcolm joined. Um, Islam is a world religion par excellence, with rituals that go back 1,400 years that are kept pretty strictly. So the 5 pillars of Islam are the Shahadatain, the bearing witness. The second, there's prayer, our 5 daily prayers or ritual, salat they're called. Um, there's Siyam, which is fasting during the month of Ramadan. There is the giving of alms, zakat, and which is like 2.5% of your saved wealth over a year. And there is the Hajj, the pilgrimage that you need to make once in your lifetime uh, before you die. Um, you need to go to Mecca at the right time of the year and make this pilgrimage. That's what Muslims believe. Okay, so again, these are questions on the Hajj, right? And also, I have some stuff about the Algerian Revolution and uh, yeah, other really great quotes that I won't read over right now. So, February 14th, a week before he is murdered on Valentine's Day, February 1965, Malcolm's home is firebombed. Um, on February 21st, he's assassinated. You know, may God have mercy upon him. He's prayed over, in the Muslim ritual, buried as a Muslim. Yeah, God have mercy on him. So, I don't harm him. Now, John Brown, who the anniversary of his execution was 3 days ago, December 2nd, after he tried to start a slave revolt, as it happened in Haiti. Right, there's an abolition. John Brown was an abolitionist, conducted the Underground Railroad. He used to take enslaved people, guide them to Canada, into Canada and stuff. Supporter of black and indigenous rights, who led a raid at Harper's Ferry in 1859 in the hope of starting a massive slave revolt, as had happened in Haiti in 1804. He was executed on December 2nd, 1859, roughly 2 years before the start of the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, where nearly 1 million people died in combat. They used to say 600,000. That's what Zinn says, but recent historians have said, you know what, it's a lot higher. It's 900,000. And he was down in solidarity with the poor, John Brown. And these images of John Brown, they've stayed in my consciousness since I was in second grade, since I first saw them, and I've always seen him as a heroic and a good figure, and I wanted to some way be like John Brown, man, like Malcolm said. uh, and Malcolm said, if you white folk want to do stuff for black folk, you better be like John Brown, man. So, okay. So this is I get a long thing, right? I probably will add one more question. Um, the clearest case of genocide in American frontier. Remember, that's a great book. I hope y'all can get it or read parts of it. That is the first, right, 1851, Peter Burnett. A war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. This is, I would love. This is a map. It's not very clear, but it shows you some of the groups. You see all this light green. That was the Yokat. Remember that prior to, and I'll put this in the test, but prior to colonization, their population was 70,000. Look at Lake Tulare right there. uh, was 70,000, and after 1848, right? And the 49ers came, and 51, right? They're already starting genocide right away. Some estimate by 51 there had already been 100,000 of the 150,000 Indians killed of California. But by 1880 there were only 600. Yokat left, man. So this is kind of giving you some numbers. Of that 20,000 left in 1880, 600 were Yokat. Notice that in the whole um, U.S. by 1900, there were only 200,000. So genocide. Okay, so the last, I think it's pretty straightforward. The essay, um, 3 paragraphs, right? Over the course of this semester, beginning with our first readings from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence, and Howard Zinn writing on Thoreau and civil disobedience, and continuing through the Autobiography of Malcolm X, Harvest of Empire, and Lies My Teacher Told Me. You've been asked to critically examine works of literature, art, documentaries, speeches, our society, history, and the geopolitical realities of colonialism, institutional racism, social justice, mass incarceration, immigration, and war in the world. You have written on many social justice issues expressed in myriad forms through authors who date back to the origins of writing itself up through the present day, and you've been asked to think critically about what they've said and what they say. An essay of 3 paragraphs, at least, explain how this class has augmented, expanded, or otherwise affected your exercise of critical thinking using at, using at least 3 examples. I said at 3, sorry. At least 3 examples of literature or other works you've been exposed to during the semester. I would like to mention those works that you felt were most compelling or interesting, or those that you will remember for a long time and perhaps teach others, but do not worry excessively about MLA and text citation, etc. Don't do a works citing page, but say where you got your information if you quote it, and just mention the books. It's not a research paper; it's more like a conversation between us, right? Where you have 3 paragraphs of 3 different things where you're breaking ideas into. So, uh, it's been an honor reading your words and listening to your voices over the semester. So if you write more, I may give you some extra credit points and stuff. Um, so let's just, I don't know why I submit the quiz. Okay, so hopefully I will see you tomorrow. And if not, if so or if not, you have this, man. All right, you need anything, just hit me up. And I really hope everybody passes. I would be really happy if everybody got A's. And take care.